The rain had been falling since dawn, the kind of slow, steady rain that made the city feel tired and heavy, washing the color out of the streets and pressing everyone a little deeper into their coats and their thoughts, and inside a small, old-fashioned diner at the corner of a nearly forgotten road, the smell of coffee and grilled bread mixed with the sound of rain tapping against the wide glass windows, creating a fragile warmth that felt like a shelter from a world that rarely showed mercy. And that was where Emily stood behind the counter, tying the faded red apron around her waist, already exhausted though her shift had barely begun, her feet aching from yesterday's double shift, her mind weighed down by unpaid bills, her mother's hospital reports folded carefully in her bag, and the constant fear that one unexpected problem could push her life completely off balance. Yet despite all of that, she greeted every customer with the same gentle smile because kindness, she believed, was the one thing she could still afford to give for free. The diner door opened with a soft bell, and an old man stepped inside, his coat worn thin at the elbows, his hair silver and slightly unkempt, his shoes old but clean, and he paused for a moment as if the warmth surprised him, before slowly walking to a corner booth near the window, sitting down with a quiet sigh that carried more weight than sound, and Emily noticed him immediately, not because he looked important or wealthy, but because there was something deeply lonely about the way he sat, his hands folded around an empty cup as if it were the only solid thing anchoring him to the world, and when she approached, notebook in hand, she asked softly what he would like, and his voice, calm and polite, carried a tired dignity as he ordered only a small coffee, nothing else, no food, no extras, and as Emily poured the coffee and placed it in front of him, she noticed how carefully he held the cup, how he looked out the window rather than at the room, as if memories were passing by in the reflection of rain-streaked glass, and time moved slowly. Customers came and went, orders were shouted and filled, plates clattered, but the old man remained, sipping his coffee with measured patience, and when Emily eventually brought the bill, she hesitated because it was so small, just a few dollars, yet she saw his hands pause as he reached into his coat pocket, his expression tightening just a little, not with shame, but with quiet calculation, the look of someone counting not money, but consequences, and something inside Emily shifted, a subtle pull she couldn't explain, perhaps born from too many nights of watching her mother pretend she wasn't in pain, or too many mornings counting coins for bus fare, and before he could say a word, Emily smiled and gently slid the receipt back toward herself and said, "It's okay, sir. Coffee's on me today," and the old man looked up then, truly looked at her, his eyes sharp and observant beneath the weight of age, and for a brief moment it felt as if he saw not just a waitress, but the entirety of her life written in her posture and her tired kindness, and he tried to refuse, his voice firm but respectful, yet Emily shook her head, insisting with a warmth that left no room for pride, telling him that everyone deserved a warm cup of coffee on a rainy day, and finally he nodded, a faint smile touching his lips, thanking her in a way that felt deeper than words, and as he left a few minutes later, walking slowly into the rain, Emily returned to her work without another thought, unaware that she had just altered the course of her life with an act she considered insignificant. What Emily did not know was that the old man's name was Richard Hale, a man whose name once commanded boardrooms and bent markets, a billionaire who had built an empire from nothing, lost his wife years ago, and grown increasingly distant from a world that seemed to value numbers more than people, and on that morning, he was not wandering the city aimlessly, but searching, intentionally stripping away the armor of wealth to see what remained of humanity when status disappeared, because after decades of success, he had reached a point where he no longer trusted smiles that came with expectations, nor kindness that waited for reward, and that small diner, that simple coffee, and that young waitress who asked for nothing in return struck him harder than any business deal ever had, and as Richard walked back to his car, a sleek vehicle parked discreetly out of sight, he made a decision that would ripple far beyond that rainy morning, a decision not driven by guilt or charity, but by recognition, because he had seen something rare in Emily, a quiet integrity that existed even when no one was watching. And over the following weeks, Emily's life continued as usual, or so it seemed, her days filled with work and worry, hospital visits and long bus rides, until strange things began to happen, first small, almost invisible, like an anonymous payment clearing a portion of her mother's medical debt, then a letter informing her that her rent had been covered for 3 months by a community support initiative, and Emily was confused, suspicious even, but grateful, though she never imagined the source. And then one afternoon, the diner manager called her into the office, announcing that a private investor had purchased the building and planned to renovate it, keeping all staff employed with better wages and benefits, and Emily felt the ground shift beneath her feet as hope, something she had learned not to trust, began to creep back into her heart, and the final revelation came when she received a handwritten letter, delivered without return address, explaining that kindness given without expectation has a way of finding its way back multiplied, signed simply, "A grateful stranger," and included within it was an invitation to a scholarship fund established in her name, covering her long-forgotten dream of returning to school, and only then did Emily understand that the old man from the diner had been more than he seemed. Yet the true weight of the story was not that he was a billionaire, but that he had been looking for proof that kindness still existed in a world obsessed with gain, and he found it in a cup of coffee freely given. And as Emily stood once more behind the diner counter, watching rain fall against the window, she smiled not because her life had changed, but because she realized that even in the hardest moments, the smallest acts of compassion can echo louder than wealth, power, or fame. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness still matters and that you never know whose life you might touch with a simple gesture, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because more stories like this, stories that restore faith in humanity, are waiting for you, and your support helps keep them alive.